Out here, the West ain't just dust and gun smoke, it's blood, betrayal, and legends carved in iron. These are the forgotten tales of outlaws, lawmen, and drifters chasing gold, vengeance, and redemption. Welcome to Dust and Iron Tales. Solitude Gulch earned its name the hard way, tucked in Montana's jagged spine where wind gnaws pine needles into stories. At its center towers a giant, ancient locomotive bell, mounted on a tripod of salvaged railroad steel that gleams amber at dusk. No one remembers who put it up or why, that its deep tone mark smiles like a compass needle in a flat, thirsty map. Jasper Dinglethorne is the Gulch's lone resident, a gentle giant with hands as rough as rope fibers and a heart that can coax a memory from a rock. Every day at dusk he performs a ritual. He climbs the wooden ladder, tends the great rope, and rings the bell 10 times with a measured, almost devotional cadence. He subsists on meager scraps left by wandering trappers and miners who follow the bell's murmur through the cold air. He is not the owner, merely the devoted custodian of a sound that keeps the valley honest with itself. Jasper carries a secret. The bell is his father's final warning system, a fragile mechanism meant to guard a dangerous natural gas vein beneath the gulch. Decades ago, his hermit blacksmith father discovered the gas and learned to soothe the earth with vibration rather than blow it apart. The bell's rhythmic ringing is a calibrated vibration that steadies pressure and prevents a catastrophic underground release. If the ringing stops for more than 24 hours, the pressure would swell and the mountains could explode into fire and ash. Into this fragile quiet rides Amelia the cartographic kind, a scientist with maps, notches, and a stubborn curiosity about legends made of steel and echo. She arrives with state-of-the-art surveying gear and a mind trained to doubt, yet hungry to solve the riddle of the solitary bell. Amelia finds Jasper preparing for his ritual, his massive hands coaxing the rope into a steady rhythm as the sun bleeds off the peak. "Excuse me," she says, formal, "I am here to study this anomaly. I need to take the bell down for examination." Jasper looks at her with kindness tempered by iron will. "Can't be done, ma'am. The bell must ring. Every day." Amelia scoffs, dismissing the story as superstition and insisting the bell is merely an old landmark in the copper beneath the tripod is of no interest to science. But a rough gang of claim jumpers, led by Whiskey Jake, arrives with rifles and plans to cut down the timber and push the claim through. Jake snarls, "This thing blocks my view, tie him up, boys. We're cutting down this ugly tower," and Jasper stands firm, knowing the moment to ring is near. When Jake's men lash out, the earth trembles as Amelia reveals the copper under the tripod and yells, "Ring it, Jasper. Ring it now," and he pulls the rope. The bell booms 30 times. The ground shudders. Jake flees in terror, and only then does Jasper resume the 10 rings to anchor Solitude Gulch to its quiet, mysterious peace. The 10 rings fled once more, sending a pale echo through the gulch. Jasper moved in a practiced arc, letting the band slide into alignment around the circle of stones. The ground sighed, then stilled, as if listening for a whisper it once forgot. Jake's footprints vanished into dust where the earth calmed, his fear receding like a tide. From the shadows, a watcher perhaps, though Valor's old guardian peered from a crevice in the cliff. 10 rings threw out threads of light that braided with the night air, weaving a veil over Solitude Gulch. Solitude Gulch exhaled, its stillness settling like snow in a quiet yard. Jasper spoke without looking away from the rings, as if listening to a distant chorus beneath their glow. "We keep the peace," he said, barely above a whisper, "not to imprison it, but to invite it to stay." The rings answered with a soft chime that sounded like rain on a tin roof. The ground ceased its tremor, leaving only the faint, steady pulse of magic in the stones. Jake, backlit by dawn's grey, paused at the edge of the tree line, eyes wide but no longer hunted. He lowered his hands, as if to apologize to the quiet landscape he once startled. A ribbon of fog unfurled along the gulch floor, curling around roots and forgotten relics. From the fog stepped an island of still air where a small figure seemed to float, unbound by gravity. The figure spoke in a voice like wind through reeds, offering a choice rather than a command. "The balance holds when fear yields to listening," it said, and the rings thrummed in agreement. Jasper nodded, his jaw tight, and pressed one more glyph into place, sealing a hinge of time. The fog drew back, and the valley settled into its quiet, mysterious peace, almost as if it had been waiting for this exact night. Somewhere beyond the ring, stars pricked the sky, and the ring's light faded to a comforting glow that promised the night would endure until dawn, when new echoes would rise again. The air cooled, and the night deepened its velvet spell round us. From the far edge of the ridge, the rings pulsed a softer cadence, as if a patient heartbeat were guiding the dark. Rocks whispered underfoot, ancient and patient, and the grasses bowed as if listening. I reached for the small compass tucked in my sleeve, but it only offered a glimmer of possibility, not direction. We had come to listen for what the night meant when it chose to listen back. A shard of memory drifted into my mind, someone speaking of rings as anything that remembers. Rings brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again, like a reply that never finished a sentence. In that wavering light, the other voices among us reassembled into a chorus of quiet questions. One spoke of maps that could bend time, another of windows that only opened for those who believed. I felt the weight of a choice loosening in my chest, not fear but the careful gravity of purpose. If dawn would bring new echoes, perhaps night had gifts of its own, the chance to hear what was waiting in the dark. We arranged small stones into a circle, a makeshift beacon for whatever listening we had left. The sky lightened just a fingernail, a pale rumour that promised that not all questions would stay unanswered. A single bird trilled, and the rings answered with a tremor of sound that felt like a password spoken long ago. We stood in a crouched line, breathing in unison, letting the slow language of the rings teach us patience. Then a whisper skimmed the air at the near top of a hill, a shape briefly visible, not human, not animal, something old. We did not rush toward it, we let the moment lengthen, savouring the possibility that it might reveal the world we hoped to see, one that glow settled into a gentler shield. We knew the night would shelter and test us until dawn. Dawn would not erase the memory of this vigil. It would simply lend it new colour, new echoes to carry forward. So we kept watch, not to conquer the morning, but to greet it as an old friend returning after a long voyage. The air was pale with dew, and the first birds made a cautious pause from the treetops. We spoke in half-hushed tones, trading memories like seeds that might grow into something new. The horizon bled gold where the water met the sky, and our shadows shortened as if bowing to a long-lost friend. A kettle hissed somewhere, turning the quiet into a small ceremony. It felt as if the world had waited for our nod to begin again. I rolled a map not to plan conquests, but to trace the routes we had wandered and dreamed. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine, a reminder of journeys taken on other mornings. We learned to breathe in sync, as if the dawn itself could hear our steady pace. A fox paused at the edge of the clearing, curious but cautious, and we did not move to frighten it away. The light gathered in a small lake like a second cup of tea, warm and unassuming. We spoke of tents that worked with the sun and rivers that remembered our names. Some faces in the memory flickered, then settled into a quiet harbour of belonging. The compass needle spun once, then found its honest direction toward an unknown but friendly future. We did not hurry toward the day, but let it arrive on its own terms, as a guest deserves. The small tasks, checking knots, tightening straps, marking a trail, took on the rhythm of a lullaby. When the first syllables of dawn crawled over the ridge, we stood and listened to the new weather of possibility. The world felt wide enough for a dozen small decisions, all of them meant to be kept gentle. A gull cried over the inlet, and its cry stitched the air with a bright, careless thread. We learned again that watchfulness is not a posture of suspicion, but of reverence for what survives us. And as the morning woke fully, we rose together, not to claim the land, but to greet the day with quiet, grateful steps. The air carried a soft woolen light that threaded through pine needles and into our lungs. We walked slowly, letting the earth determine the pace, as if the ground itself was a patient teacher. Beyond the ridge, a pale blue road stretched like a sigh between hills. A cardinal found its bright red wing and hovered briefly over a patch of ferns, as if sharing a private blessing. The rover somewhere below murmured in low syllables, tracing silver threads through gravel and grass. We spoke little, saving our voices for the simple acts, coffee for one another, a shared glance, a hand found and held. The sun climbed without force, simply lifting our shadows from the soil and setting them behind us. Our pack carried only bread, a notebook, a stubborn desire to listen more than to be heard. In the notebooks, we sketched the curve of the horizon and the way morning light braided through the leaves. The world felt arranged, as if a careful hand had tuned each thing to be understood by someone willing to linger. A hawk rode the updraft above us, circling once before slipping into the valleys like a thought dissolving. We paused at a spring, letting the cold water run over our wrists and remind us that refreshment has a neighbour gratitude. The day wore the quiet like a shawl, soft enough to ease the edge of memory and allow new things to arrive. We spoke softly of small promises kept, the kettle steam, the first map we made of routes we might take, the laughter that rose and settled. A cluster of wildflowers bowed towards us as if in thanks for not pausing long enough to crush them with our pace. The landscape offered a patient forgiveness for our haste, a reminder to walk with rather than over. By noon, the sky opened its blue and left a map of possibilities across the valley, generous and unhurried. We shared a quiet joke about the street compasses and then corrected them with the simplest sense of direction. Home is where the breath settles. When the path narrowed to moss and then disappeared, we followed the feeling of the Brandeis memory, finding a trail of mossy stones that led to the same safe place we'd started from. The mossy stones formed a patient stairway back toward the place where we began, and we walked it with the lightness of having arrived already. We found the air sweeter at the top, as if the horizon itself had exhaled. From the last step, the valley opened like a memory we had meant to keep. Birds stitched silver threads across the sky, and the wind carried them in a soft chorus. A small stream bonelessly braided through rocks, and we followed its gleam for a moment. In space where the light pooled, a circle of smooth pebbles held a candle that had weathered many summers. We did not light it. We watched it old and patient as a lighthouse on a quiet coast. Somewhere beyond the trees, a door seemed to open and close in the spacing of breaths. The moss underfoot softened into a green whisper against our shoes. We spoke in cut phrases, as if conversation itself were a gift we unwrapped slowly. The memory of fear retreated to the corners, leaving only curiosity to braid our thoughts. A fox crossed the path, its tail a brush stroke of rust and ink. It paused as if listening to us listen, then trotted on, leaving a track of tiny miracles. On the far slope, a field of daisies leaned toward the sunlight. Bright questions. We answered with a breath, and the answer seemed to glow, not in words but in warmth. The day settled into a patient hush, a lid of velvet over a bowl of stars. Somewhere a bell rang faintly, not with sound but with memory. We stepped into that memory and found ourselves already belonging there. The house we walked toward did not look like a house, but like a friendly shelter waiting to hear our names. When we reached the threshold, the rain began in a soft mist, as if the clouds were applauding, and we carried the stairs ache in our pockets, not as a burden, but as a key we could fit into any door that opened toward home. The city inhaled slowly as we walked, counting the creaks in our shoes like a well-oiled metronome. Each step wore the memory of the first flight of stairs we ever climbed together. In one pocket we kept a sliver of dusk, in the other a stubborn grain of gravity. We learned to measure distance not in miles but in the tenderness of doors that would not shut. The stairs ache hummed softly whenever a stranger laughed too loudly or a window sighed open. We told ourselves the ache was not a burden, but a compass with threadbare edges. Doors opened toward us because they heard the rhythm of our breath and remembered being open to someone else once. The key never shone. It wore a pattern of rain and long evenings. We carved our names on the underside of the world, where only mountains might notice. Somewhere between the stair and the street, hope learned to nod and leave breadcrumbs. Home was not a place, but a sense of the moment returning to you with your own name on it. People asked where we came from, and we answered with a map drawn in chalk on the curb. We learned to listen for the doors that whispered back, not with words but with the tilt of their frames. The ache softened when we shared it, like bread broken at a table that never ends. We carried our luggage of small losses, and they turned into lanterns that lit the whole way of memory. If a door refused us, we pressed the pocket key gently and moved on to the one that remembered our footsteps. The stairs ache grew quieter with time, as if it found a place to rest in the hollow of our chests. We discovered that coming home meant learning to be strangers to fear inside the same room, and on nights when the city slept, we whispered future into the walls until they woke with a soft, approving creak. So we kept walking, pocket keys warm, until the world finally admitted that home was only a door we choose to open for each other. We found a bench lit by a late street lamp and decided to sit until the night coughed up a few more stars. The keys in our pockets warmed and cooled with our breathing, like small animals waking and sleeping at our ankles. We spoke in fragments, letting the city unfold in syllables between us. So our window sighed and a kettle sang from a distant kitchen, and we listened as if we were listening for a home that wasn't us yet. The road kept its usual rhythm, but our footsteps had learned a new tempo of care. We talked about doors we had shut and doors we hoped to open, the locks realigned by honesty and maybe a little luck. A cat sprinted across the crosswalk, and we followed its curved shadow with a shade grin. It wasn't bravado or romance alone, but the stubborn beloved fact that someone would be waiting if we chose to knock. The wind carried the rumor that the city had learned to spell our names in dust on the earliest mornings. We stood and walked again, keeping each other in sight as if the air between us was thinning into certainty. The streetlights painted our silhouettes with quiet gold and left room for the unseen doors behind them. We did not hurry, because home isn't a count of steps but a decision about who walks beside you. When we finally turned the corner, the doorframes seemed to lean in a little, as if offering a private entryway to two people who had learned to knock with gentleness. A pub's chatter spilled out of lullaby voices, and we listened as though it were a safety net. The keys in our pockets warmed again, but this time not for locking away fear, but for unlocking promises. We spoke of mornings we would share, coffee cooling into hours that stretched like soft bread between our hands. A bus coughed to a stop somewhere behind us, and a bell rang somewhere far ahead, and we felt the world concede that home can be found in the small rituals of staying. If home is a door we open for each other, then companionship is a hinge that never rusts. We stepped into a doorway we hadn't noticed before, and the air inside smelled faintly of rain and cinnamon, as if the world itself approved. And so we kept walking, choosing to call this entrance home, choosing to keep opening it for one another. The doorway welcomed our tired maps and the names we'd forgotten to forget. We learned the rhythm of each other's footsteps, a language carved into the floorboards. Some days the wind rattled the hinges, but we listened for the quiet breath behind the wood. Inside, a room kept warm with the memory of shared secrets. Even when the light flickered, we sat our days like fire, careful not to waste the glow of the small hours. When someone doubted, we opened the door wider, inviting them in with a seat by the fire. The entrance became a compass, pointing not north but toward one another's courage. We spoke softly of ordinary miracles, the way socks found their pair, the way rain sounded on the roof like a lullaby. Some nights we slept in the space between rooms, listening to the quiet hum of the house stream. By morning, the dust settled into letters we could almost read, marking the corners where we stood. We kept the key on a chain that jingled every time a choice became easier. We learned to forgive the scars on the threshold, for they showed where we had weathered storms together. If a stranger knocked, we didn't rush to decide the story. We opened just enough to hear their breath. The entrance kept teaching us that home isn't a place, but a practice of arrival and departure in tandem. We brewed tea that tasted like evenings that hadn't happened yet, and shared it with the quiet between us. Sometimes the stairs whispered of paths snow had taken, and we took turns holding hands while one stepped forward. The room gave us windows in the walls, portals to chances we hadn't dared choose alone. We learned to balance the risk of yearning with the mercy of staying, and the doorway stretched to hold both. When someone left for the road, we pressed the memory of their face into the doorframe and smiled at the shadow they left behind. And in the end we found our home was not a doorway, but the practice of stepping to it together again and again. We learned to count the thresholds the way the tide counts the moonlight on the water. Every doorway became a memory we could walk back into, not to escape, but to re-enter with lighter steps. In the kitchen, we practiced saying hello to the walls, as if they had weathered our jokes. The first week, we moved with the clock, letting rituals assemble us like a quilt. We kept a chorus of mugs on the shelf, each one a small promise to be broken and fixed again. When storms rattled the windows, we gathered closer and named the wind as a stubborn neighbor, not an enemy. The porch light would blink a greeting, and we answered with a shared breath. We learned the art of stepping through together, not as a single leap, but as a sequence of careful, forgiving steps. Sometimes we faltered, and the house reminded us by creaking a little louder, like a friend teasing us back into rhythm. We traded excuses for plans and plans for helpers, until chores felt like mutual art rather than chores. The map on the fridge wore crumbs of salt and pepper from meals we cooked for strangers and kin alike. We welcomed neighbors with cups of tea in the memory of doors that had opened in us before. The garden learned our names, and we learned its stubbornness too, the dandelions that insisted on blooming at the margins. When a door stuck, we did not blame it. We paused, breathed, and found another hinge to turn together. Our conversations grew longer, not louder, as we learned to navigate pauses without losing the thread. We found that returning home was less about place and more about the practice of showing up for each other. Even the sleepless nights became rituals, a lamp lit for a friend, a window open to listen for the world as small rivals.